Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello friends, welcome to the class of Maritime Law. I am Dr. Ashutosh Acharya, Senior Assistant Professor from Law Center 2, Faculty of Law, University of Delhi. This is lecture number 14, and today in this lecture we will discuss and talk about one of the most important organizations of the modern world, that is International Maritime Organization. It is an organization which has led to formation of rules and regulations and establishment of governance structure as far as maritime activities are concerned, especially in the contemporary times. Unification of rules, settling down the rules pertaining to different aspects which may be concerning the seafarers, which may be concerning the ship, which may be concerning the cargoes, which may be concerning the safety of life at sea, may be concerning the salvage activities and what not. All of the marine aspects, maritime life aspects are or have been dealt with International Marine Organization. It is one of the 16 specialized organization of United Nations organization. Therefore, we can say that it works under the mandate of United Nations organization and has its own mandate. The larger mandate being imposing peace and security around the globe as far as law of the sea are concerned, as far as maritime transactions are concerned. If there are proper negotiated rules and regulations in place which are acceptable to the most of the nations or all of the nations, then there will not be any dispute with respect to sea or with respect to maritime transactions. So, therefore, this organization continuously and expeditiously functions and works towards unification of rules and making of rules and laws as far as sea or maritime transactions are concerned. So, the learning objectives or outcomes for the today's lecture would be to know about the structure of IMO. So, there is a hierarchy within the International Maritime Organization. What is that hierarchy as far as the functionality of International Maritime Organization is concerned? Then we will also look at and know about the working of International Maritime Organization. What are the different functions of these positions which are situated in a hierarchical manner at IMO? What are the different bodies, what are the different organs that have been placed in the IMO as far as the structure is concerned, and then what is the working of those bodies, what is the working of those organs as far as IMO is concerned. And lastly, thirdly, to know about the contributions of International Maritime Organization. IMO has contributed significantly and continues to contribute as far as development of law in maritime transaction is concerned. Then lastly, to know about the contemporary relevance of IMO, how IMO copes up with different situations. How did IMO deal with the maritime transaction when COVID-19 was in place? How did IMO dealt with situations or deals with situations when there are complex situations such as conflicts between the regions, conflict between states, or there is unpeaceful situation in place, or the situations are when the situations are not normal, how IMO plays its role as far as maritime transaction or sea laws are concerned. So, we will look at it one by one in under 4 different categories. So, firstly we will look at the introduction of IMO, as we see that a number of maritime treaties predate the IMO. They dealt with various aspects of international trade on a regional basis, such as the Baltic lumber trade between Scandinavia and Northern Europe. The British laid down commercial and maritime law in British colonies throughout the world to ensure consistency in the application of law for merchants, as did the Belgians in administering its African colonies. The impetus to form an international maritime organization with global reach was the 1912 Titanic tragedy that called for a more strenuous effort to deal with maritime safety. The original Safety of Life at Sea Convention, SOLAS Convention, signed in 1914, lacked an organization to enforce and provide guidance in fulfilling SOLAS requirements. So, once IMO has come into being and new SOLAS Convention has also come into being, IMO ensures the implementation through nation force within the national boundaries. It became widely recognized that the best way to advance safety at sea was by establishing a permanent international maritime body. This had to wait until the 1945 founding of the United Nations. In 1948, an international conference in Geneva adopted a convention formally establishing the Intergovernmental Maritime Consultative Organization. So, we see first IMCO came. So, as it says, this had to wait until 1945. Once UN came, then 1948 international conference happened in Geneva, which adopted the convention formally known as Intergovernmental Maritime Consultative Organization, famously known as IMCO, whose name was changed in 1982 to International Maritime Organization IMO. 1982, friends, is also the year when United Nations Convention on Law of the Sea came into being. So, 1982 saw two significant updations as far as sea and maritime transactions concerned. The objective of IMO was to develop and maintain a complete regulatory structure for all facets of shipping, including maritime safety, environmental concerns, legal matters, technical cooperation, maritime security and shipping efficiency. These are all important matters. If you see it again, that maritime safety, be it environmental concern, legal matters, technical cooperation, maritime security and shipping efficiency. As far as SOLAS Convention is concerned, as far as updated guidelines with respect to machinery, with respect to updation of methods through which transaction must take place through sea routes, or if you talk about technical aspects, if you talk about loading the ship is concerned, if you talk about crew members are concerned, their skills are concerned, if you talk about drilling in a particular high sea is concerned, where seabed area has to be drilled and mineral resources are to be extracted, all of which comes within the domain of International Maritime Organization. Maritime security, rules and regulations pertaining to maritime security, what measures should be taken by the states in order to make sea more secure from piracy, from environmental damage or from other dangers or perils. It also functions to improve shipping efficiency, how to make ship more efficient, how to allow the states or flag states to transport their goods from one place to another place in a more efficient manner, in a speedy and less fuel consuming fashion. What guidelines should be followed as far as such maritime transactions are concerned, all of which is largely dealt by this one organization IMO, and is a facilitative organization also at the same time for national codifications, so that in domestic legal system also they can learn, they can cope up with the international laws and regulations, and if all the nation states follow the uniform rules and regulations, it will be quite easier and comprehensive and smooth as far as following the rules and regulations, following the policy measures with respect to maritime transactions, because maritime transaction is something which is not restricted to a state. It includes international transaction by the very virtue and nature of such a transaction, and therefore it is evident that if the rules and regulations are uniform in nature and are governed by one single organization, then it will make the transportation much more easier, it will make the trade much more easier, it will make the governance of the shipping transactions and ships and other related aspects much more easier. Further, if you look at the origins and development the IMO convention entered into force in 1958 with the purpose in mind summarized by Article 1A of the convention to provide machinery for cooperation among governments in the field of governmental regulation and practices relating to technical matters of all kinds affecting shipping engaged in international trade, to encourage and facilitate the general adoption of the highest practicable standards in matters concerning maritime safety, efficiency of navigation and prevention and control of marine pollution from ships. In addition, IMO was also responsible for related administrative and legal matters. So, it also helps in sharing of technology from one part of the country to another part of, from one part of the world to another part of the world, wherein if the advanced technology is used by almost all the states, it will reduce the pollution, it will increase the efficiency of the ships, and other advancements will also come in the domain of different national technical and legal systems. IMO's first duty was to adopt a new version of the International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea, the most important treaty involving maritime safety. Once completed in 1960, the IMO focused on matters related to the facilitation of international maritime traffic, which is very much necessary, as there are certain busy routes from where ships sail from one part to another part. If you look at Indian Ocean, if you look at Mediterranean Sea, Black Sea, certain routes are quite busy, and therefore, in order to regulate such a maritime traffic, or let us say there are certain canals such as Panama Canal or any other canal from where the ships from different countries are to pass through. In such scenarios, management of those routes and traffics comes in the domain of International Maritime Organization, and it can then manage those traffics. So, international maritime traffic regulation, control, etc., can also be done by International Maritime Organization. Further, it also takes care and facilitates in the aspects of load lines. Now, in the lecture number 11, we had already discussed about the load lines, how to draw load line in different geographical regions depending upon the weather conditions. IMO specifies all these regulations pertaining to load lines. Now, loading is an essential aspect as far as the safety of the ship is concerned. The ship should not be overloaded, and what measures to be undertaken as far as loading of the ship is concerned, IMO plays a significant role as a facilitator. Further, it facilitates the aspect pertaining to carriage of dangerous goods, plus revising the system of measuring the ship tonnage. Now, if hazardous and obnoxious substances are carried from one part of the another part, then what rules and regulations be complied with, what certificates to be obtained, so that safety of marine life, safety of ship can be ensured. Further, it also revises the system of measuring the ship tonnage. Load lines dealt with the maximum cargo tonnage a ship could carry without becoming a coffin ship. Coffin ships were so overloaded with cargo that the freeboard between the ship and the ocean surface was not sufficient to keep storm waves from flooding a vessel. So, if you overload the vessel, it will further submerge inside the water. Then if there are higher waves, if the weather conditions are not conducive, the water will come or inside the ship and ultimately will disbalance the ship, resulting into the toppling of the ship, conclusively damaging the ship as well as the life at ship and as well as the cargo over the ship. So, therefore, load line protects such a mishap that could happen in disturbed weather. So, if it is a coffin ship, if it was overloaded with a cargo that the freeboard between the ship and the ocean surface was not sufficient to keep storm waves from flooding a vessel, one would think that a ship owner would not be so careless to overload a vessel with paying cargo that would endanger its survival at sea. But if marine insurance were available, which was in place earlier before these regulations came into being, then the ship owner is not at loss. So, if the ship sinks or if the ship sunk down, is sunk, then it will be protected by marine insurance. But if the ship reaches to its shore, the ship owner will receive a higher freight for the cargo that it has transported from one place to another place. So, it is a win-win situation in both the scenarios as far as the ship owner is concerned. So, therefore, if marine insurance were available to insure against such a mishap, then this may encourage moral hazard. If the ship survived the voyage, an owner would reap the enhanced reward from overloading a vessel. If the ship were lost at sea, marine insurance would recover his investment. It was no lose situation unless you were a crew member. Even though the IMO's initial focus was on safety, pollution from oil transportation eventually presented a new challenge. High rates of growth in the volume of oil being transported by sea coupled with increased size of oil tankers became of prime concern after the Torrey Canyon disaster in 1967. This spill of 1,20,000 tons of oil caused considerable environmental damage to the affected coastal region. As a result, specific measures were designed to reduce the probability of tanker accidents and to minimize their environmental consequences. The IMO also became involved with environmental consequences from routine operations of cleaning oil cargo tanks and disposal of engine room waste, whose aggregate pollution was greater than pollution from tanker accidents and casualties. So, we see that post Torrey Canyon incident, a major concern came to the fora of International Maritime Organization, and it started working towards making of rules, updated rules and regulations as far as oil transportation and oil pollution at marine life is concerned. So, we see then post such a disaster coming into being, new conventions coming into being in order to tackle oil pollution. Also, there was significant advancement in the size of the ships that were carrying oil from one part to the other part of the world. And larger the ship, and if larger the ship, ultimately it is at the risk that if there is an oil spill, it will loosen out a larger amount of oil over sea, such large amount of oil which will almost be impossible for anyone to clean from the sea. So, IMO had a very big task on its plate when such disasters started happening, especially with respect to oil spill. So, the focal point of all these measures was the International Convention for the Prevention of Pollution from Ships 1973, as modified by the Protocol of 1978, also known as MARPOL 73-78, brought in 73, modified in 78. It includes not only accidental and operational oil pollution. Now, accidental oil pollution would be where the leakage has happened due to collision or the mishap within the ship if any oil spill takes place, or accidental due to accident if oil spill takes place. Those are accidental oil pollution. There are certain operational oil pollution also, wherein if the ballast within which the oil was being carried is cleaned, then certain amount of oil which is stick to the container, and if it is cleaned, that particular oil spill also is counted as operational oil spill, not as accidental, but operational. So, due to the operation of the vessel, sometimes oil spill also takes place. At certain point of time, there is loading of the vessel, and in a certain weather condition, if the oil is to be released from the ship due to certain reasons, if it is released into the sea water, that will also be operational oil pollution. So, due to cleaning activities or due to other certain aspects, if the oil is removed from the ship, then that would amount to operational oil spilling or oil pollution. But if it is due to accident, then it is accidental oil pollution. So, there are different requirements with respect to cleaning also, and as far as accidents are concerned, precautionary measures are to be taken prescribed under MARPOL by the IMO in the convention. Then there are operational oil pollution, for which how to prevent those operational oil pollution going into the sea water, ultimately damaging marine environment. So, regulations pertaining to all of these things are into the convention, all of which because of the efforts of International Maritime Organization. But also pollution by chemicals, goods in packaged form, ship sewage and garbage and marine engine emissions. All are these different aspects pertaining to pollution, and all of which have to be mitigated. Rules and regulations are to be brought into place, which came into being and due to the efforts of the IMO, which we can say that is a significant contribution by International Maritime Organization in the modern world post 1982. Now, as the IMO was also given the task of establishing a system for providing compensation to those who had suffered financially from oil pollution, such as shoreside resort owners, fishermen and any party suffering the impact of oil pollution, 2 treaties were adopted. Now, before we go on to what is the law that IMO dealt with, let us understand the issue that if there is an oil pollution and if it reaches to the shore, the industry situated on the shore, which is a if it is a flourishing tourism industry, due to this reaching of oil on the shore, the tourism industry will be adversely affected. How to compensate those hotels and people running their businesses in the touristic areas is also a task that was given to IMO. So, for this 2 treaties were adopted in 1969 and 71 that enabled victims of oil pollution to obtain compensation more simply and quickly. Both treaties were amended in 1992 and again in 2000 to increase the limits of compensation payable to victims of pollution. Now, it was also claimed that it was not foreseeable and how the hotels or the resorts can claim their damages because some oil pollution happened in some other region, and if it reaches to shore, it was not foreseeable. Nevertheless, the compensation regime under these 2 treaties covers the compensation for the people who got affected, the touristic places or the shores that got affected. So, therefore, post amendment in 1992 and again in 2000 increased the limits of compensation payable to victims of pollution. Many other associated legal conventions have been developed since then. Most are concerned with liability and compensation issues. A global search and rescue team system was initiated with the establishment in the 1970s of the International Mobile Satellite Organization IMSO, which also greatly improved ship communication capacity. The Global Maritime Distress and Safety System GMDSS was adopted in 1988 and began to be phased in by 1992. In February 1999, the GMDSS, that is Global Maritime Distress and Safety System, was fully operational, which meant that a ship in distress anywhere in the world could be virtually assured assistance. The distress message would be transmitted automatically even if the ship's crew were unable to radio for help. Now, this scientific and technological development, if has happened at one place, can be shared with the other flag states as well to be placed in their ships. So, IMO helps or facilitates in spreading the technological advancements as well, acts as a major facilitator for technology sharing as well. 2 initiatives in the 1990s were especially important in dealing with the human element in shipping. On July 1, 1998, the International Safety Management Code entered into force and became applicable to passenger ships, oil and chemical tankers, bulk carriers, gas carriers and high speed craft of above 500 gross tons. On July 1, 2002, it also became applicable to other cargo ships and mobile offshore drilling units above 500 gross tons. On February 1, 1997, the 1995 amendments to the International Convention on Standards of Training, Certification and Watchkeeping for Seafarers 1978 entered into force, STCW 1978. They greatly improve seafarer standards and for the first time gave the IMO itself powers to check government actions to ensure required information was submitted to the IMO regarding their compliance with the convention. A major revision of the standards of training, certification and watchkeeping for seafarers convention and code was completed in 2010 with the adoption of Manila amendments to the STCW convention and code. Even in the previous lectures, we have seen different types of certificates to be obtained, such as safety certificate, load line certificate or surveyor certificate. Part A and Part B has been mentioned under the Merchant Shipping Act 1958. So, different types of certificates are to be obtained by the charter, by the ship owner before a ship starts sailing. Till those certificates are obtained, a ship cannot be declared to be a seaworthy ship. So, in order to declare a particular ship to be a seaworthy ship, every flag state is under an obligation to maintain those standards. Those standards are largely international standards, and therefore, once these certificates are obtained, only then we can say that a ship is suitable to sail or is a seaworthy ship. Therefore, these codes directly come from IMO, and the national governments then adopt these codes in order to facilitate international norms. In the 2000s, new conventions relating to the marine environment were adopted, such as anti-fouling systems. So, which also we discussed in the lecture 12 or 11, wherein anti-fouling system convention is in place, which takes care of the marine life by repelling them from the vessel which is sailing in the sea. Ballast water management to prevent the invasion of alien species, BWM 2004, and on ship recycling, Hong Kong International Convention for the Safe and Environmentally Sound Recycling of Ships 2009. During this time, there was also a focus on maritime security with the entry into force in July 2004 of a new comprehensive security regime for international shipping, which involved the inclusion of the International Ship and Port Facility Security ISPS code, initially made mandatory under amendments to SOLAS adopted in 2002. In 2005, the IMO adopted amendments to the convention for the suppression of unlawful acts, that is also known as SUA Convention against the safety of maritime navigation 1988, and its related protocol 2005 SUA protocols. Among other things, the protocol introduced the right of a state party to board a ship flying the flag of another state party when there were reasonable grounds to suspect that a person on board has been or is about to be involved in the commission of an offence under the convention. Changes to the IMO amendments have been adopted over time as developments in technology and or lessons learned from accidents or casualties. The focus on implementation continues with the technical cooperation program aspect of IMO's work. The IMO member state audit scheme became mandatory under several key IMO instruments on 1st January 2016. The audit plays a key role in supporting effective implementation by providing an audited member state with a comprehensive and objective assessment of how effectively it administers and implements mandatory IMO instruments covered by the audit. So, the IMO instruments that we have already discussed, largely as far as seaworthiness of the ship is concerned, we can consider ISM and ISPS codes to be one of the necessary codes to be implemented. Now, this is the contribution that IMO has made as far as different conventions, different aspects and different areas are covered by IMO, acting as a facilitator where it takes care of different aspects of maritime transactions, be it life, be it cargo, be it the ship itself, be it the dangers and perils of the sea, be it pollution, and be it technology sharing from one country to another country or around the globe, or acting as a facilitator for all other necessary requirements. Now, we will look at the organizational structure of IMO, wherein we will look at the different organs and different bodies of International Maritime Organization and what are their different functions within the International Maritime Organization. The organizational structure of IMO comprises of an assembly, a council, 5 main committees, which will be the Maritime Safety Committee, the Marine Environment Protection Committee, the Legal Committee, the Technical Cooperation Committee and the Facilitation Committee and various subcommittees. So, as the Assembly Council is concerned, they are largely the higher administrative bodies. As far as the main functional bodies are concerned, we have 5 main committees which function on different aspects of maritime activities, which would be related to safety, Maritime Safety Committee, then you have Maritime Environment Protection Committee, then Legal Committee with respect to framing of rules and regulations which may be related to pollution, which may be related to protection of environment or protection of life at sea. Then as far as technology sharing is concerned or new technological aspects are concerned, the Technical Cooperation Committee is in place. Then you have Facilitation Committee that facilitates all the necessary requirements of the states from one part of the world to another part of the world. Then you have other subcommittees also, which we will look at what are those different subcommittees. So, starting from Assembly, the first major organ of the International Maritime Organization, the Assembly is the highest governing body of IMO, which includes all member states. Member states meet once every 2 years in regular sessions and in the event of extraordinary session if needed. Some of the primary responsibilities of the Assembly include approving the IMO work program submitted by the Council, voting on the budget and determining the financial arrangements of the IMO. Assembly is the supreme body of the organization. It has a role in the election of other organs of IMO, approval of budget, approval of work program of the organization and overall control of the activities of the organization. The Assembly has a specific role in recommending member states adoption and amendment of the regulations and guidelines for the prevention and control of marine pollution from ships. However, the Assembly usually passes resolutions on the basis of the recommendations from other organs of the organization with specific responsibilities, which may be the committee recommendations also. Assembly recommendations are not legally binding. However, it is common that these recommendations are incorporated in national law as they are treated as international standards. The Assembly's function also includes taking decisions for convening international conference or following any other appropriate procedure for the adoption and amendments of international conventions which have been developed by the MEPC or other organs of IMO. MEPC would be Marine Environment Protection Committee. Council. Council is the executive organ of the IMO and oversees the work of the IMO. It is elected by the Assembly for 2-year terms beginning after each regular session of the Assembly. The Council is made up of 10 largest nations in providing shipping services, 10 largest nations in international seaborne trade and 20 other nations with a special interest in maritime transport or compensating for underrepresentation of any geographic area of the world. Aside from making recommendations to governments on maritime safety and pollution prevention via the Assembly, the Council is responsible for the following functions: coordinate activities of the organs of the organization, consider the draft work program and budget estimates of the organization for submittal to the Assembly, receive reports and proposals of the committees and other organs and submit them to the Assembly and member states with comments and recommendations, appoint the Secretary General subject to the approval of the Assembly and enter into agreements or arrangements concerning the relationship of the Council with other organizations subject to approval by the Assembly. So, the Council functions largely under the control and dominance of the Assembly, and it also makes recommendations to the Assembly which comes from any of the subcommittees. Further, if you look at the representation at the Council, you will see that it provides for representation of 10 largest shipping nations. Now, this also has raised a significant issue at the international fora, especially with respect to Panama and Liberia. Now, Panama and Liberia are two comparatively small states as compared to some other seafaring nations which are having high industrialization with respect to shipping activity, or which have high shipping activity as far as gross tonnage etc. are concerned, or registration of ships are concerned, or as far as trade aspect is concerned. Now, why Panama and Liberia have high are in the top 10 major shipping countries is because of the registration that happens either in Panama or Liberia. Now, most registrations take place in Liberia or Panama largely because they have easy non-compliance based rules and regulations in the Panama or in Liberia as claimed by other nations. Now, as far as this allegation goes, therefore, it is easier for the ship owners to register in Panama and Liberia as compared to registering themselves in other states, largely because of the loose norms of international standards. So, therefore, certain states have raised this particular concern as their claim to become the member of the council comes to the fora and comes to the front. Now, Maritime Safety Committee. This is the highest technical body of the MSC. The primary role of the Maritime Safety Committee is to consider any matter within the scope of the organization concerned with aids to navigation, construction and equipment of vessels, manning from a safety standpoint, rules for the prevention of collisions, handling of dangerous cargoes, maritime safety procedures and requirements, hydrographic information, logbooks and navigational records, marine casualty investigation, salvage and rescue, and any other matters directly affecting maritime safety. So, it deals with almost all the technical aspects that are to be brought in place, so that safety of the ship, safety of the crew, safety of the cargo, safety of the marine life can be ensured, and this has to be done through different aspects. So, these different aspects you can see that how cargoes are to be handled, what procedures and requirements are to be undertaken in order to have a safe seaworthy sail of the vessel, hydrographic information, then what all information to be placed in the logbooks, navigational records and investigations to be conducted, rules pertaining to salvage, what technical aspect is to be undertaken. So, this particular committee is one of the most important committee as far as safety of life, safety of cargo and safety of ship is concerned. In addition, the MSC also is obligated to perform any duties assigned to it by the IMO convention or any duty within its scope of work. Furthermore, the Maritime Safety Committee has the duty for considering and submitting recommendations and guidelines on safety for potential adoption by the Assembly. The MSC implements amendments to conventions such as SOLAS Safety of Life at Sea Convention. It includes all member states as well as those countries which are party to conventions such as SOLAS, even if they are not IMO members. Although Maritime Safety Committee's work revolves mainly around maritime safety and security, its work also has some relevance for the prevention of marine pollution. MSC consists of all members of the organization. Initially, the Maritime Safety Committee was constituted by 14 members. According to the original article 28A of the IMCO Convention, Maritime Safety Committee shall consist of 14 members elected by the Assembly, the topmost body of the IMO, including at least 8 of the largest ship owning nations. The IMCO Assembly in its first meeting held from January 6 to 1959 elected the US, United Kingdom, Norway, Japan, Italy, Netherlands, France and Germany as the largest ship owning nations. Liberia and Panama seriously objected the inclusion of France and Germany because both Liberia and Panama have larger ship owning interests than France and Germany. Against this backdrop, on 19 January 1959, the IMCO Assembly decided to request the ICJ to give an advisory opinion as to whether the election of Maritime Safety Committee was in accordance with the IMCO Convention. The main argument of the nations who were opposing inclusion of Liberia and Panama is that both of these countries are FOCs and they are not and they do not have a genuine link with the vessels flying their flags. However, the ICJ decided that the committee elected by the assembly was not constituted in accordance with the IMCO Convention. So, if you look at the Panama and Liberia, as I have already told you, due to the certain easy registration processing and non-requirement of the procedural certificates, the Panama and Liberia had a better claim. But even in contemporary times, such situation cannot come into being because of the higher standards already being in place as far as registration is concerned. Largely we see the implementation through IMO in different national legal systems is in uniform method. So, therefore, we see that a better situation has been reached since 1959 till today. But as far as this particular instance is concerned, where ICJ gave its advisory opinion, as per the IMCO regulation, Liberia and Panama had a better claim than two of the elected nations. And it is stated that the determination of the largest ship owning nations depends solely upon the tonnage registered in the countries in question. And also it has to be taken into account that a ship may be constructed in anywhere, in any part of the world, and it may be registered in some other country. Not necessarily that ship that has been constructed must be registered in the same country. So, if it is registered in some other country and the owner also belongs to some other country, the claim has always been, the question has always been that the ship does not have a genuine link with that particular nation, and the court has decided on that particular aspect that we need not go into largely or delve largely into the aspect of genuine link. The genuine link is decided by the registration of the ship. So, once a ship is registered in a particular flag state, that flag state has taken the responsibility of that particular ship, and therefore, that automatically establishes its linkage with that particular state. So, therefore, it says that any further examination of the contention based on a genuine link is irrelevant for the purpose of answering the question which has been submitted to the court for an advisory opinion. This controversy demonstrates the north-south tensions inherent in the organization from the very first meeting of the assembly. However, representation of a FOC country in an important organ of the organization does not necessarily ensure participation of developing or least developed countries. An FOC country may ultimately be used as a rubber stamp of large shipping companies beneficially owned by developed countries. In 1974, in the 5th extraordinary session of the IMO Assembly, the IMO Convention was amended to include all members of the organization in Maritime Safety Committee. Maritime Safety Committee is historically linked with IMO's activities regarding marine pollution. The first marine pollution related organ of the organization, the Subcommittee on Oil Pollution SCOP, was established in 1965 as a subcommittee of MSC. Marine pollution related IMO activities were undertaken through MSC after this, and in 1973 SCOP was renamed as the Subcommittee on Marine Pollution SCMP. After the establishment of MEPC as a separate organ, marine environment related works were transferred to it. Nevertheless, Maritime Safety Committee is still relevant for marine environment because many of its activities are directly or indirectly relevant for the prevention of pollution from ships. These include aids to navigation, construction and equipment of vessels, the prevention of collisions, handling of dangerous cargoes, maritime safety procedures and requirements, hydrographic information, navigational records, salvage and rescue. Another committee that we have is MEPC, Marine Environment Protection Committee. The MEPC, which includes all member states, was first founded as a subsidiary body of the assembly and raised to a full constitutional body in 1985. Anything related to the prevention and control of pollution from ships fall within its purview of responsibility, including the adoption and amendment of conventions, regulations and measures to ensure their enforcement. MEPC was established as a permanent subsidiary organ of the assembly in 1973 in its 80th session. The 9th session of the IMO Assembly in 1975 institutionalized MEPC as an organ of IMO through an amendment of the IMO convention. This amendment came into effect in 1982. MEPC is at the forefront of IMO's activities for the prevention of pollution of the marine environment from ships. The establishment of MEPC as a separate organ of the organization has been termed as the formal recognition of marine environmental protection in the same status of maritime safety. Therefore, MEPC has the power to consider any matter concerning the prevention and control of marine pollution from ships within the scope of IMO. The committee is entrusted with the responsibility of performing functions conferred upon the organization under international legal instruments for the prevention and control of the marine pollution from vessels. In particular, MEPC is responsible for functions related to the adoption and amendment of regulations or other provisions stipulated in those legal instruments. It is also responsible for promoting measures for facilitation of enforcement of international marine environmental conventions. MEPC also gathers scientific, technical and any other practical information regarding marine pollution, and if needed makes necessary recommendations and guidelines for combating such pollution. It also promotes cooperation with regional organizations in respect of marine environmental matters. Presently, virtually all negotiations for the legal instruments and amendment of existing legal instruments concerning marine environment and within the competence of IMO are facilitated through MEPC. The workload of MEPC is growing enormously. For example, MEPC 66 held from 31st March to 4th of April 2014 had 21 agenda items. Amongst others, these included harmful aquatic organisms in ballast water, recycling of ships, air pollution and energy efficiency, reduction of GHG emissions from ships, identification and protection of special areas and particularly sensitive sea areas, inadequacy of sea reception facilities, harmful anti-fouling systems for ships, promotion of implementation and enforcement of IMO legal instruments, technical cooperation activities for the protection of marine environment and noise from commercial shipping and its adverse impacts on marine life. To deal with such enormous workload, MEPC regularly establishes working groups, intersessional working groups, review groups and ad hoc expert working groups for dealing with specific issues. Now, the subcommittees that has been established under or not only under, but in order to support Maritime Safety Committee or to support Marine Environmental Protection Committee are subcommittee on human element, training and watch keeping. Now, this committee focuses on the crew, the master as far as the training is concerned, as far as the watch keeping aspect is concerned, which directly relates and connects to the safety of the ship. Then subcommittee on implementation of IMO instruments. So, different IMO instruments come into being, how will they be implemented, what rules and regulations, what certificates to be obtained and how to be implemented in domestic legal systems is the area and domain of this particular subcommittee. Then you have subcommittee on navigation, communications and search and rescue, then subcommittee on pollution prevention and response, then subcommittee on ship design and construction, and subcommittee on ship systems and equipment, and subcommittee on carriage of cargoes and containers. So, if you look at all these subcommittees, it covers almost all the aspects pertaining to safety, pertaining to technical aspect, pertaining to other different regulatory aspects which will ultimately lead to protection of environment or safety of life at sea. Subcommittee on human element, training and watch keeping's latest work is groundwork laid for the comprehensive review of the STCW Convention and Code. The subcommittee agreed on a roadmap, methodology and a list of specific areas for the comprehensive review of the International Convention on Standards of Training, Certification and Watch Keeping for Seafarers and the accompanying STCW Code. The STCW Convention establishes basic requirements on training, certification and watch keeping for seafarers on international level. In 2022, the Maritime Safety Committee instructed the HTW subcommittee, that is human element and training and watch keeping subcommittee, to conduct a comprehensive review of the STCW Convention and Code to adapt the existing global standards for seafarer training to reflect new trends, developments and challenges in the maritime sector. Then we have subcommittee on implementation of IMO instruments, wherein the subcommittee on implementation of IMO instrument brings together flag, port and coastal states to consider implementation issues, including the analysis of consolidated audit summary reports from the mandatory IMO member state audit scheme. The subcommittee has a key role in casualty analysis and issuing lessons learned from marine incidents. The subcommittee receives and analyzes report state control data and keeps under review the procedures for port state control, guidelines for survey and certification, including the survey guidelines under the harmonized system of survey and certification, also come under the remit of this subcommittee. Then subcommittee on navigation, communication, search, rescue deals with all matters related to navigation and communication, including the analysis and approval of ships, routing measures and ship reporting systems, carriage requirements, performance standards for navigational and communication equipment, long range identification and tracking system and development of e-navigation. It also deals with search and rescue matters and the global maritime distress and safety system. Further, subcommittee on pollution prevention and response deals with all matters relating to pollution prevention and response which falls within the IMO's remit. Then subcommittee on ship design and construction, subcommittee on ship systems and equipment deals with the construction of the ship, and the construction should be of such level that it leads to the updated technological requirement, and the system and equipment of the ship should be of such a nature which takes care of the updated technological regime. So, it deals with wide range of technical and operational matters related to systems and equipment on all types of ships. It includes life saving equipment, appliances and arrangements, and fire detection and fire extinguishing systems. We also have another important committee known as legal committee, which played an instrumental role in adopting IMO legal instruments to establish a comprehensive legal framework for compensation for vessel source marine pollution damage. The committee is authorized to consider any legal matters, including environmental legal matters, within the scope of IMO. The legal committee meets at least once a year. Then we have Technical Cooperation Committee, which is formed in 1969, is a subsidiary body of the Council. It was institutionalized by means of an amendment to the IMO Convention, which entered into force in 1984 and includes all member states. This committee is obliged to consider any matter within the scope of IMO concerned with the implementation of technical cooperation projects for which the IMO acts as the executing or cooperating agency, and other matters related to IMO's activities in the technical cooperation field. So, if you look at legal and technical cooperation committee also plays a significant role, especially if you look at legal committee, it plays an instrumental role in framing all the conventions and rules and regulations of sea related rules and regulations, or maritime transaction related rules and regulations. So, significant role is also played by this particular aspect. Technical Cooperation Committee also plays a very pertinent role in order to execute and cooperate agencies and other matters related to IMOs. Then we have Facilitation Committee. This committee was established as a subsidiary body of the Council in May 1972 and fully institutionalized in December 2008 by an amendment of the IMO Convention. It includes all member states of the IMO and deals with IMO's work in eliminating unnecessary formalities and red tape in international shipping. The committee implements all aspects of the convention and facilitation of international maritime traffic, as well as matters within the scope of IMO concerned with facilitation of international maritime traffic. In recent years, the committee's work has been dedicated to strike a right balance between maritime security and international maritime trade. The Facilitation Committee advises IMO on matters related to facilitation, particularly with respect to implementation of 1965 Convention on Facilitation of International Maritime Traffic, which came into effect on 1967. In 1991, the IMO Assembly institutionalized this committee as one of the main permanent organs of the organization through adoption of an amendment to the IMO Convention. Further, there is some indirect relevance of this committee's activities for the prevention of marine pollution from ships. Now, the role of IMO in transnational economic governance. A good example of transnational economic governance is the role of IMO in ships fuel, also known as ship bunkers. Propelling ships is a major operating expense. IMO regulations on sulfur emissions of ships fit the concept of transnational economic governance. Fuel is a major economic cost item in operating ships, and governance by the IMO over ships fuel is transnational in reach. IMO governance over sulfur emissions started some decades ago when government officials of Norwegian port city thought that they had taken care of local sulfur pollution by limiting sulfur emissions from nearby utilities and factories. Yet, To their surprise, atmospheric sulfur content remained high. It turned out the sulfur was from ship emissions calling on the port. The authorities knew that the problem of sulfur emissions from ships could not be handled in a port basis and even on a regional basis, and made a presentation to the IMO. The IMO recognized the transnational nature of the problem and called for a series of hearings of what should or could not be done. A long series of restrictions on shipboard sulfur emissions was inaugurated, staggered in time, to give the shipping industry an opportunity to adapt to ever tightening requirements. Ship bunkers are highly polluting, as bunkers are usually the residue of the refining process, sometimes referred to as resides. Bunkers are an almost sludge-like petroleum waste containing nearly all the original sulfur and metallic contamination of the crude oil consumed by the refinery. The original limitation was 3.5% of the international waters and 0.5% in restricted waters bordering the shoreline of maritime nations. The higher limit was not difficult to comply with, as the average sulfur content during that time was 2.7% sulfur in ship bunkers, but the lower limit required segregating bunker tanks between high and low sulfur bunkers to shift fuels when entering and leaving restricted areas, that is the shoreline. With plenty of time for ship owners to adapt, the limit on the ship bunkers was lowered to 0.5% in international waters and 0.1% in restricted waters. The availability of low sulfur ship bunkers was far short of demand. Desulfurizing high sulfur ships bunkers was not an option for technical and economic reasons. Consequently, many ship owners switched over to low sulfur marine gas oil, a far more expensive refinery product than consuming a refinery waste. Oil refineries left with unsaleable high sulfur resides could go one further step in cracking to obtain asphalt for road building. Alternatively, they could sell the high sulfur resides to utility or industrial plants adapted to burning this product to generate electricity or produce goods. Depending on local regulations, these plants may or may not be required to install scrubbers to remove sulfur from the plant's exhaust. From the point of view of ship owners, rather than buying low sulfur marine gas oil, scrubbers could be installed that removed sulfur and metallic content of ship's exhaust by mixing the exhaust with seawater. This permits the owner to purchase cheap high sulfur bunkers whose savings in fuel costs paid for the scrubber installation. For most vessels, effluent from the scrubbers was merely dumped into the ocean, transferring air pollution to water pollution. A more expensive means of storing scrubber effluent on board the vessel for discharge in a port for safe disposal is not normally practiced. More environmental attention is currently being paid to the scrubber operation. Therefore, under IMO guidance, programs have been initiated to investigate non-oil sources of energy. One is LNG as ship's fuel, which it largely is for LNG carriers. LNG propelled ships are being built for trades when LNG is available. The residue of burning LNG is water, carbon dioxide to a far lesser extent than burning bunker fuels, while diesel engines can be fairly easily adapted to burn high viscosity resides or clean marine gas oil or LNG. LNG requires a special and costly storage facilities on board a vessel. So, what do we see? We see here that IMO has played a significant role as far as the updation of laws and rules and regulations, technology and what not. Everything that is related to sea or related to the ship or to the cargo, where it is required that the sailing is made safer, efficient and cost effective, IMO has played its significant role at all levels and at all dimensions in order to facilitate a better shipping, a better trade around the globe. Now, with this I end this particular lecture, wherein we talked about International Maritime Organization, its contribution, its working, its functions and also its structure and how does it function. This gives us a holistic idea as far as the prominent specialized organization of United Nations is concerned. With this I conclude. I thank you for your patient listening. Namaskar.